I'm David Walters, and this is Innovatio. Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to our new listeners, and thank you to our existing subscribers for sharing and liking the content. It really helps support podcasters like myself. So in the news this week, Bob and Doug landed from SpaceX. What a fantastic achievement. For me as an innovator and a lover of tech, Elon Musk certainly delivered on that. City Airbus also this week took their UAM and conducted their first autonomous tries. It was really fantastic to see. And again, for me, it gave me goosebumps to see this type of technology moving forward. We just need the infrastructure, regulations and certification to come forward, but it takes time. And we at least have the building blocks to begin moving forward. Now, on today's show, I have Edward, CEO of Herotech8, joining us today, a manufacturer, supplier of an autonomous box, drone-in-a-box solution. We're going to be hearing from him shortly. From me, thank you again for supporting the show, and please continue to like sharing the content. Edward, welcome to Innovatio.
Hey, David, how's it going?
Yeah, good, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening on the show. Now, I've known you for many years in the industry, and we've both kind of seen each other progress through the industry. But for those that aren't familiar with you and Herotech8, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Myself, Edward Anastassacos, CEO of Herotech8. So Herotech8 is a small robotics company based over at Cranfield University. We also have an office over in the US in Berkeley, working with Skydeck. It's sort of our accelerator program coming out of the US. But we developed this automated drone-in-a-box solution that allows us to automatically deploy drones, let them fly their mission, recover them, and then automatically recharge them as well, prepping them for their next flight.
Fantastic. So over the years, Ed, I mean, you've had a variety of different roles in various different organizations. Can you give us some insight into some of those?
Sure. So I guess starting way back, I did my undergraduate degree was in natural sciences. I majored in physics and physical chemistry. And I spent 3 years effectively at the University of Bath before doing effectively a year abroad in Singapore at the National University of Singapore, where I sort of worked to expand a little bit of my knowledge across sciences in general. And then I headed over to I was pushed to do a master's program with both Cranfield University and the University of Würzburg in Germany, where I spent 6 months in the city of Würzburg doing space physics, and then 6 months in a little town called Kiruna. It's a couple hundred miles, I think, north of the Arctic Circle. 6 months there to freeze and effectively develop around space physics. Cranfield, I transitioned to Cranfield to do astronautics and spacecraft systems engineering, which was actually a very exciting part of my career. I participated in a lot of exciting research projects and competitions. We won a European Space Agency award there for effectively drone use as well, around the camera systems to very accurately track targets on the ground, things like poaching vehicles, for example, and look for debris in oceans. Those are some very exciting pieces of work that I managed to do. After that, I ended up working on other European Space Agency research projects, like the ExoMars rover mission. So
that sounds really
looking
cool.
at the, it was good fun. The vehicle itself was very, very slow, but I worked in that Mars yard that you may have seen seen in the news, sort of just press go, and so hopefully it gets to the end. I think it drove at something like a centimeter per second. So you're talking really slow speeds. But the guys at Airbus there that I worked with were fantastic. Spent a lot of years, I think, a number of years developing more defense-oriented drone systems, drone research around autonomy, as well as the physical payloads, camera systems, and so on, as well as supporting other very, very cool projects around the government Pathfinder program for the DFT, for Department for Transport. I led that whilst I was at the Catapult, as well as let's say, the first generation or first stage of the ongoing UTM program that is also pushed by government. It's probably a good summary of my career so far.
That's certainly more a more exciting start to a career in Amanda Robotics than I had. But man, that's awesome, dude. That's really cool.
Yeah, it was definitely exciting because it wasn't something I was anticipating at all. I think coming out of Cranfield, I was sort of a little bit lost with whether or not to go down the physics route or and go down the academic side of things, even overseas to the US, or stick it out here with a very exciting robotics and in particular drone space that was evolving. So I'm very pleased with how the first part of it's turned out anyway.
No, that's cool. That's really cool. Yeah, I never knew you were involved in space stuff. So yeah, it's good we had this conversation. You don't always know the detail and how people started. And I think that's one of the reasons for me doing this podcast, is about allowing people to see the innovators and the pioneers of the industry and kind of tell their story, see their journey. I think a lot of people in industry at the moment, think they're always going to be the guy flying a Phantom, let's say, and taking photos for an estate agents or something, but it really goes to show that in this industry, you can start really small, just as I did actually, as a single man operator, and really progress and kind of channel yourself a path. So I guess that leads me on to my next question. I mean, what would be your advice for people like coming out into this industry now?
It's a good question, and certainly the industry needs more sort of innovators in this space, particularly when you look at the obstacles towards, I guess, wider adoption, the growth opportunities that lie ahead, and not just in the, let's say, innovating around the tech side of things, but also innovating around business and business development. I think innovation can come from lots of angles. I think the exciting thing about drone usage, commercial drone usage, is that it doesn't really require you to have you don't need a PhD in this. You can see the application at it very, very quickly as soon as you've seen how they're using this stuff to monitor or look at inspection, for example, for oil and gas. That has progressed very quickly. In the offshore space, you see great use of drones, and every day there are more and more applications that come out of this. But you don't need to have a PhD in control systems to go into the drone sector. You can simply go to your local shop, see how it's used, and then I think it's down to you and your problem-solving skills. Can you find the application that suits both your background, your understanding of that, let's say, that little niche to exploit it? I don't think it's not something that it requires you to have an enormous technical background, because you can depend on the likes of, for example, DJI to develop stuff. Power, there's some fantastic manufacturers out there that can do a lot with it. But because it's emerging technology, the exciting part is finding the right application. That's I think what I would advise to a lot of innovators out there. And you can be very fast to get to market, to make an impact. Whether it's in the traditional industries or it's perhaps in more nonprofit, governmental search and rescue style applications. All of these kinds of things, drones for good, all of that makes a tremendous amount of sense when you compare it to the conventional ways of doing things. So I'd say look more into the applications. If you do not have the technical experience, you can still make extreme amounts of impact.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that. I mean, I remember back in 2013, 2014, no, 13, standing on a wind turbine farm in Wales, flying a Cinestar 8 and a Canon 5D on a servo-controlled gimbal. No control over focus or zoom, downlink over a 25 milliwatt 5.8 VTX, all surrounded by a TV in the back of a van, and it's amazing how fast the technology has grown in these sectors. And I think I realized two things back then. One, the infrastructure operators and managers back then weren't ready for that type of technology. Two, the technology wasn't really able to deliver the quality needed and the high resolution. I mean, you don't get no better than a guy on a rope wearing a pair of gloves, touch, feel on that kind of thing back then, because you just didn't have the control over the payload to give you that level of detail, that the guy with a pair of hands. Now, oh my God, flying with 60 megapixel cameras, full control over zoom, focus, it's amazing where it's come. And I think what we've seen over the years, and especially even including myself, I got to a point of where in my career as a solo operator, I absolutely wanted to get hold of the latest tech, but couldn't financially do it personally. So I went and worked for a company that did have that kind of budget. And I think that kind of, for me, that's where my journey really first started, and exposing myself to more use cases, and I think that's one thing for anyone, I guess, in the industry at the moment that's wondering how do they do their next step. There are lots of different avenues you can go down. As you mentioned, if you haven't got the tech or you've got a use case you want to do, but you don't have the expertise, partner with someone, work with an O&M for a turbine or a land surveying company, well, that's cool, man.
Yeah.
That's
No, I think you touched on a lot of really good points. That there are a lot of companies out there that can support these kinds of things. So whether it's maybe an O&M, and all of these big manufacturers of different industrial assets, they have their own innovation program that you can tap into. The catapults were a great source for me. Obviously, like I'm maybe what you would probably call Blue Bear alumni. So there's a lot, and there's quite a lot of us that have tried to make an impact there. It's fantastic little research projects that come out of that place.
yeah, absolutely.
Truly fantastic stuff. But I think like there's a lot of ways you can get into it, and the industry is growing, and that means that the industry also needs to be supported by fresh minds that can have a different perspective. The industry, it might be new, let's say in the commercialization sense, but the industry has been around for quite some time, right? Like the technology has been around for some time, but it's when it reaches that sort of critical mass where suddenly everything starts evolving super quickly, whether it's around new communication systems, the imaging systems, is paired nicely with mobile phone sensors and so on. But there's a lot of companies around, a lot of industry specialists around that are increasingly taking on these kinds of technologies. I think I saw in the news, Cranfield University just launched a new master's program just around the insurance side of things, and drones were expected to be a big part of that as well. I think that there's so many ways in which you can get involved in this space. Really, it's up to you to pick out which avenue you want to go down.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely where the market has really opened up, opportunity-wise, with a lot of research companies now. There are organizations actually recruiting people now for specific roles within their organization to manage their drone operations. And I think that's where we're also seeing a lot of the solo operators now moving into those areas, kind of as I mentioned before. So, I mean, Herotech8, I mean, it's not your first venture. You are quite entrepreneurial. So, I mean, have you had any other startups or any other businesses?
Yeah. So yeah, we had a couple when I was at university. Now they were not successful whilst I was there. One of them has now, I think, become and secured some more traction. Um, this startup life is always very easy to start. Um, as in, I've got a great idea. I'm going to put a company around it and try to take it to the next level. So again, generating the concept itself is actually quite straightforward. It could be a brilliant idea, like maybe some of the ideas my co-founders had when we were pushing, for example, this lens manufacturing mechanism for these cameras. Or we had a separate startup called Osol, and that's still running to this day. It's now based out of France. And now it works again. That continues to do a lot of work with the European Space Agency and the French Space Agency, it's CNES. And they're doing some tremendous stuff. But it's always the next step that I found almost impossible to achieve until you find your first set of, let's say, investors. And I think out of the drone world, it's important to distinguish noise from, let's say, emergent players. It's always tough in any emerging sector because everyone wants to come in with 1,000 or 1,000,000 ideas. But to just make the distinction between someone that has let's say, a valid mindset to generate value for a customer or for their target, that's quite difficult. And I know that there's often not a whole lot of excitement from the industry, let's say, the older generation in the industry when they see how VCs sort of very quickly take over the sector. But these VCs are often a good example of how to do the initial, let's say, be the initial filter. They're effectively putting their money where their mouth is and hoping to generate some return on investment there. And I think VCs their job is to fund good tech. And it was always difficult for me to be able to articulate and communicate with VCs. Having such a technical background, I struggled there. I think it is important for entrepreneurs to learn or at least from my experience, to learn how to communicate effectively with those that can finance your project. It's become, even if it just comes down to, let's say, innovation grants, articulating why your technology is important. And it's not just a project that I've drawn up on a quad chart and thought it was cool. That works maybe if you are working for a company that has a budget to spend on R&D and you can communicate with those guys. But for externals and as a startup owner, that was the most difficult thing I think I'd ever done. It took me years to do it. So, not for so some people, I think some companies have shown that you can be incredible at it without generating much tech to begin with. And that's a skill in itself. I wish I had it, but unfortunately, I'm still learning.
I think that's one of the key things about any leader in a new startup is to recognize the skills you don't have, and to surround yourself with the people that can give you those answers, and I've worked for 3-4 startups now, and I think that's been intrinsic, luckily for me, with all of them. They themselves don't, and they might be the CEO of a company, but they go, hey, I am not necessarily the brightest person here, although I'm sitting in the CEO seat, but I am surrounded by smart people that can give me the answers that I need, to support X, Y, and Z, and I think that's that's a key fundamental for any leader, especially in the startup sector.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Picking your team and your investor. Obviously, for some companies, you don't have the luxury of 1,000 investor choices, but certainly your team. If you can find the right team members who you can offload work and trust completely, that if something were to happen, whether you had to spend 2 weeks away or something, and they could pick up the slack, if you can find those guys, you're starting with like you're 10 miles ahead than where you would be otherwise. I think that an effective team and communication within that team it's unreal how important that has become for us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I can certainly echo all of that. So I guess next question from me then. So like with the industry gaining momentum now, we're starting to see organizations in specific sectors realizing the benefits of the technology in the unmanned industry. What's next for you?
So I think Herotech8 is at a point we have. So I think we have paying customers already. Um, the challenge with where we have been, let's say, not 3 or 4 months back, was to figure out which customers would stick. So it's you have to the first step in my eyes when I developed like let's say a small roadmap was to get customers that would pay for a trial, and that was a milestone in itself. Can you convince someone to spend money on the technology that you've developed, even if it's maybe not 100% there? Once you've done that and you've delivered the technology, it's which customers are going to stick around. I think that is an enormous task in it by itself, and then generating, I guess, largely recurring revenue, or at least repeatably, with multiple different customers. That's the next point. So I think we're at that third stage, right? That third stage is where we're trying to scale, finding all the right customers, understanding which segments to go into, and this is I think something that other, not just drone companies, but any industry that is beginning to adopt emerging tech, whether it's AI or whether it's drones, whether it's robots, or whether it's something else. It's very tech centric, but often without a focus on an industry, because you're still in this customer discovery phase, and we've been in this customer discovery phase. Like just to mention, we actually started out in the agriculture space without really fully understanding what agriculture was really about. we read a report that said agriculture was going to be the key focus of the sector. Tried to approach in our let's say very old school way of going and speaking with farmers, and then finding out that they didn't have money to sort of pay for the technology, or were reluctant to again, or were reluctant or not confident in the tech or the use of the tech.
Farmers tend to like spending their money on tractors, not drones.
Well, it's changing, right? The sector has also evolved, but there's a lot of excitement behind the technology as a whole, but understanding where to put it first. So in our case, drone in a box, we eventually came to the deduction that there were three key use cases, three key scenarios where you would use the tech. And the first is in terms of frequency. So we drew some years ago the notion that the greater the frequency of operations, the more return on investment you would get as a customer. So we were looking for customers that would want to use drone technology all the time, not once every 6 months or once every year, but really once every day, at least 2 to 3 times a week. Really, that's the bare minimum. You want to fly this thing all the time. How many drone operators want to do that? We weren't sure. But a very clear example was security. Security is a 24/7 job. You want a drone operation there, and to basically pay for someone to come over to your site and fly a perimeter patrol every day, every 3 hours even.
Gets expensive.
The cost was oh yeah, that was unreal. But the next thoughts, what if the box can do it for you, and you just have to send it over the video feed or the controls to someone in a control room? That becomes very, very clear. So that's frequency in mind, but there's lots of other measurables that you can apply to segments to determine where your tech is going to bring the most value. And that is something that everyone struggles with. It's in startup lingo, or in more industrial, I guess, lingo. It's called product market fit. It's understanding whether your product is going to make the most sense, have the most value, and where customers are really going to pay, because there's an element of urgency around it. That's what we're trying to find out now for ourselves, and we're beginning to feel it.
Cool. No, this sounds really exciting, and I'm looking forward to come over to Cranfield, where you're based and where you're currently doing some testing and some trials over there. So I'm really looking forward to coming over and see this solution, becoming a reality. I think we've all talked about it back in the day about how simpler it would make things, not having the pilot sitting there flying. But to see it come to fruition, it's really exciting, which I guess leads me on to kind of one of my closing questions. Future Flight is kicking off in the UK, a really exciting initiative looking at empowering industry with innovation, seeing how we can make a change with regulation to support the deployment of new drone technologies and obviously urban air mobility. Where does that fit into this kind of space? What do you see coming from Future Flight?
Future Flight is, first of all, Future Flight is incredibly exciting. There's been quite a bit of a lead up to this moment, and we're sort of we're just about to learn what projects are going to get funded and so on. So it's right now, I'm almost sweating just talking about it. But Future Flight is really Future Flight is really exciting because it's going to effectively, I think, after this whole let's say field of study that is about to be done, demonstrations, trials, and all of this kind of stuff, I think we'll emerge from the other end really with a better understanding of what drone operating frameworks will be tied into a whole manner of different things, like UTM. I guess is considered one of the bedrocks of this stuff. At the end of this, we'll have a better picture of how everything ties in together. Something that I maybe drawn is that it's a little bit like up until this point, or maybe a couple of years ago, the industry felt like it was flying. Well, pardon the pun. It was unintentional, but it was really like going down at a million miles an hour. But suddenly we're at a junction where in order to scale better, we need to have a better understanding of the infrastructure. How do we communicate and coordinate things? What's the implications of insurance? Can you do swarm stuff in a safe manner? Is government an appropriate means of dictating what the rules or what the guidelines and coordination requirements need to be? I think we're beginning to learn about all of this stuff in one go, and it'll be very exciting to see what happens over the next 3 years. Is that right? Or 4 years even?
Yeah, that's correct.
But then it's which road do we decide to go down as a country or as an industry? What rules do we adopt? Which rules, does it even stop there? Do we need to continuously revise things? I think it will be very exciting, and it's simply because up until this point, and the CAA, DFT, all of those guys, they do a tremendous job, and I think they're beginning to understand the problem very well. It's always easy for people on the ground to sort of, criticize based on progress. We haven't got drone rules like developing at the million-mile-an-hour pace that we've previously been developing at or implementing at. But these rules, they're there to protect people. Urban air mobility, people are already suggesting that it shouldn't be a problem. But I think we all know that it just takes one horrendous incident, and then the ones that will be at the receiving end of this often is going to be the regulator. They could have done something differently. So they want a full picture before we go ahead. But this Future Flight gives everybody the opportunity to go out, test the cool tech that we are developing still at a million miles an hour, the new ideas around how to control what can develop into a very chaotic environment. And arguably the most important thing is to give some confidence to the regulators that the scenarios that we present them with are viable and that we can make it safe enough. So that's the ultimate thing, right?
Well, no, absolutely, and I mean, if you look at the GA community at the moment, electronic conspicuity hasn't been mandated yet in the UK. It's not a requirement, and that ability to have that complete picture of the sky to enable some of this drone technology to happen, is a difficult one. And I think what we're seeing in the industry now is that actually the drone operators are beginning to actually fill the gap and develop technologies that allow them to mitigate against the manned aviation that aren't electronically equipped, which is a difficult one to try and manage and deal with. But if we as an industry want to progress, that's what we have to do.
Right. I mean, like those are the compromises that we've made in the past. But I feel like there are they're these are very, very hard rules or freedoms rather that have provided now sort of present themselves as an obstacle to support, I guess, a true exploitation of a technology. One thing that government has to be able to resolve, and there's a lot of research out there that shows that it can, but isn't there yet, obviously, is to dynamically progress with their regulations. How do you, regulations, when you think of it, it's very difficult. It's very stale. It's hard to overturn. But increasingly, we're going to find out over the next years and so on that government can move also very effectively, quite nimbly. You can say a lot about the hiccups with COVID-19 response across the world, but in some places, COVID-19 response has been done very, very effectively, and that's through the rapid implementation of new laws. And I don't think this is that different than what you have with, let's say, the aviation sector. I think drones, UAM, all present themselves in interesting but also scary ways, and regulations will evolve very quickly to accommodate them, simply because the economic opportunity is very, very clear in the
Money
future.
speaks, right?
I'm sure people. Yeah, well, that's it, right? Money speaks, and if the country can take let's say, a leading role in the world in developing this tech and implementing this tech, I said if it can take, it is already in that leadership race. It's sort of maybe if we can exploit future flight to really hammer home the capability and prove to maybe not just within the industry, because the industry already knows what it can do, but prove to everyone else that it's here to stay and that the benefits are real. That's when you will have the industry get like the light bulbs go off across the different sectors, going, that's really good that you could do this with the helicopter, or you could do this with the old school methods that we've had, but actually with drones, getting better data, lower cost, better safety, and so on. I think it's pretty clear for a lot of sectors where the value comes in here. Just about now showing everyone that it's possible to do this safely.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Fantastic. Well, Ed, I mean, I could sit and talk to you for hours about drones and technology. I just want to thank you once again for coming on the show. It's been really fantastic to speak with you, and even for me to learn some insights about you that I didn't even know. And I hope people listening have enjoyed listening to Ed, having him on the show. We've got another episode coming up focused specifically on Herotech8, where we'll also be showing some content of the solution actively working and understanding some more of the technical capabilities within that solution. Ed, if people want to get in touch, understand more about your technology, how can they find you?
So probably the best way to do it is probably over LinkedIn. I have a very long last name, which I'm sure you'll throw in with your link. But just, Edward at Herotech8.com or Edward.Anastassacos at Herotech8.com.
I'll ensure there is a scrolling spelling of your surname if there is enough characters to fit on the screen. I might have to even typeface size 8 or something. But I will ensure that on the video reel at least, there will be links displayed to Ed's website and social channels should you wish to reach out and keep in kind of close contact with the activities that they've got going on. And also here, of course, at Innovatio, we'll be following Herotech8 as one of the UK's leading innovators with the work that they're doing. From me, thank you again to Ed and to our listeners. Please like and subscribe to the content. Follow the social media channels to keep up to date with the content that we're putting out. We've got some fantastic episodes coming up following other innovators happening in the UK and also some specially focused urban air mobility podcasts as well. But from me, David Walters, host of Innovatio, thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.